Hello and welcome to this course with me, Rory from Hyper Production, and today I'm sitting in with Sonic Academy giving you a complete course on IK Multimedia's T-Rax 5. So in this particular episode I'm going to be showing you a full length, basically master of a track, going from importing the track, processing it and then exporting it. So this is kind of like a real world situation. I'm going to be showing you everything that I would do in this master, obviously adhering in context to the track that we're using. So this is going to be a house number which is going to be nice and punchy. We're going to make it nice and wide, make it nice and loud for our basically output master. So in the other videos leading up to this one, you should be quite familiar with the setup, with basically the metering, with all the modules and where everything is located within this standalone version. So we are focusing on the standalone, which is i.e. the mastering suite. So I'm going to dive straight in and get on with it, and I'm going to be explaining as I go along what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So the first thing that we're going to do is obviously import our audio. So I'm going to open up that plus button there, and then I'm going to go down to track 2, pre-master. So it's always worth noting when you're coming out of your DAW after a mix, just probably put a little tag on there saying pre-master so you can find it nice and easily. And then what we're going to do is have a quick listen through, just check the metering and just double check any sort of bits that we need to fix. Have a look at the spectral analyzer and also the loudness meter, and then just see if there's anything that we can start sort of boosting or possibly even taking away. So here we go. Okay, cool. So there's definitely some stuff we could do in there. We could definitely possibly just low cut the bass slightly so it's not quite as rumbly, and then obviously bring out that lovely bit of kick drum as well, and maybe try and bring out some of those vocals that are sitting in the back of the mix as well. So if you're wondering how I got onto this particular window, i.e. having the waveform there, you've got two little toggles here, so you can go from chain view with all your individual modules, or you can then go over to waveform view and then start selecting your loop points. So you turn loop on and off just like that, which is typical of most DAWs that got similar audio transport buttons set up the same way. So the first thing we're going to do is bring in a EQ to try and fix any sort of spiking bits that we have here. So I think the best one that we're going to use, we want to use something a bit more graphical. So if I go up to this filter window here and click equalizers, we then got all our EQs there. So we can either use a linear phase or we can use an equal, but the linear phase typically would have addressed a lot of those issues throughout our mixing and then coming into our pre-master. So we're going to use the equal. Some people say it's called equal, but I've heard numerous people call it equal, so I'm going to carry on the great tradition. So let's just play the track through and let's have a little listen as to what we can sort of fix as well, and we can then obviously have the benefit of the EQ to see if there's anything peaking. Okay, so there's quite a bit of activity around 2K, which is kind of like your present zone. So I'm not going to dip it too much, but I could just see a few little problem frequencies there. So I'm just going to sort of dip it around there. Okay, another great one to do when you're EQing in mastering is actually put it up really high, put the Q quite high, and then just sort of scan through. And then when you hear any problem frequencies that are sounding a bit harsh and a bit rubbish, then just dial them down. So here we go. So there we have just a couple of problem frequencies that we've actually sorted out and just kind of, this is called notch EQing. So this is where you sort of notch it out and then you sort of get rid of it completely. So with the main key to EQing when you're doing mastering is not necessarily to do big sort of huge leaps in decibels especially when you're boosting as well. They want to be very subtle, very wide, but in this stage I just want to notch out a couple of problem frequencies, because the key to this master, we want it played out in the clubs, we want it to be quite loud, so we want to try and eliminate any harsh frequencies that we're just going to find annoying when we boost up the volume. So that's why I was doing the notch EQ there. Typically you would have a lot of these problems basically eliminated coming out of the mixing phase, but so we just did a little bit of a fix up there as well. So also what we want to do is try and add a little bit of air, so I'm going to use this EQP1A. So I'm going to click onto that, and then I'm going to leave the low frequency in the boost as it is. I'm not going to do anything to that. And then this high frequency I'm going to bump it all the way up to 16, which is kind of like the borderline of human hearing, and then we're going to boost it up to about 5. Okay, and then I'm going to switch this off, and then I've used this EQ quite a lot of times, so I kind of know what it's going to be doing. So I'm going to switch it on, and you'll kind of hear that nice little bit of air on the high end, that nice little bit of shimmer. So here we go. Okay, that was quite funny. The lyric actually said too much and I had to dial it back, so that was a bit of a funny coincidence. So, yeah, so that just adds a nice little bit of air there. On this EQ, I'm going to go back to this. I'm just going to put a very subtle low cut on here. So you can select the shape of what your EQ curve wants to be using this shape button here. So obviously we want to do a low cut. So then we're going to go down to this one here. Sorry, that one there. So there you can see we're going to do it. So we're going to take off around about 35. So that should help tidy up some of the low end there. And then we're just going to leave that down at 0. Okay, I'm actually just going to take it up to 40 just because that's 35. We're still getting a bit of rumble there. So let's just bump that up to there as well. Okay, so the next thing we probably do is actually sort out some of the dynamics. So I'm going to change where we're looping the track from, and I'm going to basically just listen out to what's happening from this bit going into a more quieter bit. So we've got the intro, which is relatively minimal, and then it's obviously going down into a bit of a drop off. So we'll just listen to about this bit here. So here we go. I couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it. Wanna come and get it. I couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it. Now you don't talk too much, it's probably giving up. Okay, another thing I'm going to quickly do and add in there is there's a lot of hissing, and because he's got the vocals quite low cut, they're quite sort of mid-rangey, it's actually boosting the highs a little bit. So what I'm actually going to do is put in a de-esser. So if we go on to other and go down to wherever it is, there we go, de-esser. Just going to whack that in there as well. And then we're just going to play around with it. I'm just going to have to sort of distinguish where those problem frequencies are with those sort of high hissing, but it should normally be around between 8,000 to around 11,000. That's kind of like a good starting point. So listen mode, we're going to go on DS, and then we're going to select our range just there. So probably go from about 8,000. And then this button here is obviously we're telling the plugin how much we want it to de-ess it. If you do it too much, you can make it sound a little bit dull. So we don't want to overdo it. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to loop it back around a busy bit again, just so we can hear what the DS is doing. Okay, another powerful part of this plugin is that you can select the release as well. So you can tie in those transients, which is, again, a really super powerful way to do it, because you might not necessarily want to get rid of the high-endness. You might just want to tighten it up a little bit, and this plugin is perfect for that. In fact, I don't know another plugin that actually does the release for the de-esser, so there we go, another bonus. So we'll listen to that in the track. So there we go, we don't have our high end quite sort of screaming out as much. It's sounding very tight at the top end now. So now what I want to do is, if I'm basically changing the top end, is now that I want to secure and make the bottom end a little bit tight, because at the moment it's sounding a bit overpowering. So what I'm going to use is the multi-comp, sorry, the quad comp here. So I'm going to whack that in there. And then I'm just going to focus on this lower end. So this is basically like a multi-band compressor. So we're going to be focusing more on the low end to just try and tighten that up and try and rein it in a little bit. So let's have a listen. Okay, great. So that, again, is a really powerful way just to control your bass, give it a little bit of, sort of rein it in a little bit. And in turn, it's actually made the track a lot clearer. You've brought out the clarity of that track, which is great. So I'll just bypass it, and then I'll introduce it, and you'll see exactly what I mean. And if you also notice the meters, we're not necessarily changing or boosting any volume, but we're then engaging some perceived loudness, which is exactly what we want. We don't necessarily want to be adding sort of physical volume and amplitude to the track. We want it to sort of be perceived as being loud, which is exactly what we've achieved just there. So the next thing I want to do is add sort of an overall compressor to the sound, just try and sort of tighten in the overall dynamics there as well. So what I'm going to use here is an Optocomp. Just whack it on the end here, and just let's have a play around and see how well this copes. So you might have noticed I've just turned the output just to 0 dB because I don't want it to be adding any volume. I just want to process it. Adding loudness and bringing up the track in volume can happen in the next couple of stages to come. In the compressor, we just want to control those dynamics and not necessarily add any volume. So let's have another play around. Okay, so a nice sweet spot to get overall compression of a master. You probably want to be hitting between -3 and -5 dB of gain reduction. That's not going to be too much that it's going to be apparent that you're compressing the track, and it's just going to be transparent enough just to rein everything in and not basically choke the dynamics too much. So if you look on the meters here, when I play it, you'll notice we're hitting about -3 to -5. Okay, great. So that definitely sounds a lot more controlled, and it definitely sounds a lot tighter, and things aren't kind of like poking out too much. So we've definitely achieved what we wanted to there. So just a quick recap. So we've got the EQ there, just tidying up a little, basically a few problem frequencies that we're having. We've got the EQ-P1A, adding that lovely bit of air at the top, just sort of beyond the borderline of human hearing, just to add that nice bit of air. So we necessarily can't hear it, but we can certainly feel it. We've got a de-esser, just basically reining in some of those high-end attacks and just sharpening up and tightening up that high end, especially with the hi-hats and some of the sort of low-cut vocals that are in there as well, which is nicely reining that in as well. We've got the quad comp, basically just sorting out our low end and tightening that up, so that's made it nice and solid and not poking out too much, and also helping us for when we basically boost up the gain for our limiters. We're not necessarily taking up the track with too much energy of unwanted low-end rumble. Then we've got the Opto Comp, basically gluing everything together, making it sound nice and uniform and glued together. Okay, and then last but by no means least, we're then going to be using another limiter to try and bring up the volume. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm actually going to add another saturation plugin just to try and give us a little bit of drive in there and a little bit of warmth. So I'm going to play that through. I'm going to put it up to Tape 2 mode, which is just basically another copying a characteristic of old tape machines, and this one that I've been playing with certainly sounds like that, but of course I'll play with a couple so you can hear what they sound like. And then I'm going to leave the outputs, I'm going to put the outputs up to, just going to leave that to dB, and then I'm going to bring it in, and when it starts sounding a bit too much, I'm going to pull it back and just dial it back until I find that sweet spot. So here we go. So even with those 2 dBs of gain sort of boost in the saturation plugin, it's definitely made it seem a little bit more present, just a bit more up in your face, and that is exactly what we are looking for. So now, last but not least, I'm going to be using the stealth limiter to basically give it an overall loudness boost. Now this stealth limiter is incredibly powerful. It's meant to be transparent, so you can't hear it pushing right up against the brick wall limiter, which is going to be sort of around minus 0.1 dB of our peak. So I'm going to keep increasing that until it starts sounding a little bit too quashed, and then what I'll do is then dial it back a little bit and we'll find that sweet spot. Okay, so we're nicely hitting it minus 0.1 dBs on our peak, and then our RMS is going to be around about minus 6. You certainly don't want to go up to minus 5 or minus 4, because that's when it will start sounding way too squashed. And you'll notice that I'll just put the mode from tight to balance, so it's just going to even out some of the dynamic range in there, rather than sort of tightening up the transients to try and squeeze them through, sort of one sort of bit at a time. It's going to make them all sound a bit more even that way. So again, that's a real powerful plugin to sort of bring up the volume of your track. So what I want to do is actually start just bypassing the plugin and just make sure, and then I'm going to do the match gain, equal gain support from the source material that we've got going in. I don't want it just to be adding loads of volume. I want it to actually sound like it's actually doing some processing. So then this toggle is then going to enable us to hear the difference between the original to what we're doing, but then keep it the same level. So here we go. So that's great. So you could hear that it sounded louder, but if you check the meters, it actually wasn't that much louder. So it's that perceived loudness that we want. So there's lots of little bits of trickery that you can do to make it sound like it's louder without actually being louder, and that is the trick to mastering in terms of getting a nice balanced mix without crushing all the dynamics within the track. So we've got our master there, we're really happy with it, and then what we're going to do is then export it, and then we can then go on to upload it up online. So then what we're going to do is go to our album assembly up here, and then we've got our track, as you can see here, so we're going to play that through.
Much is probably giving up, but think he's had enough, cause here I know the love, no, we don't talk too much is probably giving up, but think he's had enough, cause here I know the love.
Cool, so that is sounding lovely and strong and club ready for the weekend. So then obviously we go down to here, we're going to change all our track names. So we're going to put this one to Awesome Track. And then we're going to put the artist name as Sonic Academy. And then we're going to leave everything as it is. We're not using it as a commercial release because we don't. That means we don't have an ISRC code. Copyright protection, yeah, we might as well just leave that on. And then we're going to click export. And then we're going to leave it as WAV. Sample rate of 44.1 hertz. Resolution at 16-bit, and then dithering off. And it's going to ask us where do we want to save it. So then we'll probably just whack it on our desktop for now. Then click save. And then that's just going to run completely through. And through the power of editing, we're then going to skip to the end. Okay, so there we are done. So if we just hover back onto our desktop, so Awesome Track, there it is. So there we are, nice, big, bolshy and loud, exactly how we want our club music to be, but obviously within reason. So that has been basically me mastering a track from beginning, showing you how I'll do my process and determining what the track needs and basically trying to fix some of those issues on the fly. And then we've talked about basically exporting the track, and then you are then ready to upload it online and let the world hear what you have to offer. So keep watching this course. We're covering a few little more topics in this course. I've been Rory from Hyper Production, and you've been watching Sonic Academy, so stay tuned.